often think fear has a clear shape. It should come with strange noises in the night. A door opening by itself. A shadow standing at the end of the hallway. Sobbing echoing from the next room. Or at the very least some rumor credible enough to make your heart sink. But the truth is not like that. There are kinds of fear that arrive very slowly. Very softly. Very politely. They do not kick your door down and force their way into your life. They simply sit quietly in a corner of the room, patiently watching you with eyes that do not exist, until you happen to look back. And once that happens, everything is already too late. I learned this story from a man named Kai. Or at least that was the name he used in the final emails he sent me before vanishing completely. If it had not been for the photographs, the warped audio recordings, the copy of a hotel check-in slip from a place that barely existed on any tourist map, and the trembling testimony of a female housekeeper who quit after exactly one night, I probably would have dismissed this as just another fabricated tale dressed up to bait curiosity. But some details in that file were too specific, too cold, too much like the smell of something that had once lived, once stared, once waited on the other side of a reflective surface, for me to file it away as harmless midnight fiction. Kai was a photojournalist who specialized in travel features and old architecture. He liked wandering into forgotten places. Hotels about to be demolished. Decaying towns nobody wanted to visit anymore. According to people who had worked with him, Kai did not believe in ghosts. He believed in humidity, mold, the sounds of old pipes, sleep deprivation syndrome, hallucinations caused by exhaustion, psychological strain after long journeys. In other words, he was the kind of person who only believed in things that could be measured, photographed, recorded, or dissected into a clear cause. And that was exactly why, when he received an offer to write about an old hotel on the outskirts of town, he agreed almost immediately. The hotel was called Tsukikage Hotel. The name meant moon shadow. It sounded beautiful, elegant, slightly old-fashioned, and intriguing enough to appear in a magazine dedicated to mysterious places to stay. The broker sent Kai a few exterior shots. A 5-story building in an old style. Painted cream now yellowed with age. Tall windows, narrow hallways, gray tile roofing, and a small front garden with pine trees trimmed too severely into unnatural shapes. Every photograph had been taken in the late afternoon, under pale light and a low, cold sky, whether by accident or design. Not one of them included a person. Kai arrived on a drizzling afternoon. The road leading to the hotel cut through a neighborhood that looked almost abandoned. Many houses were locked up. Storefront shutters had been pulled down. And an old laundromat had faded flyers posted on the wall. Their red ink washed so pale it looked like diluted blood. At the bottom of the slope, Tsukikage appeared behind dark trees and sagging power lines. In his first email to me, Kai wrote that he stood at the gate for nearly a full minute just staring at the building, wondering why a place like that was still open for guests. There was no glowing sign, no sound of cars, no rolling suitcases clattering across the ground, no smell of food drifting from a kitchen like in a normal operating hotel. There was only the aging facade, the darkened windows, and a vague feeling that the place did not truly welcome arrivals, but did not want them to leave either. The lobby was very clean. Clean in a way that felt wrong. Not modern, gleaming clean, but the kind of clean that looked forced. As if someone had scrubbed every trace of life off the floor. Off the banister. Off the black velvet chairs placed across from the reception desk. No music played softly in the corner the way it usually would. The wall clock ticked too slowly. Kai said that when he looked up, the second hand jerked forward one step at a time. But between each movement there was a pause longer than normal. Long enough to make him wonder if it had stopped completely. The woman who checked him in looked to be in her 40s. She wore a dark uniform, her hair tied neatly up, her skin pale, and dark rings shadowed her eyes as though she had not slept for many nights. She spoke quietly and politely enough, but there was one strange thing throughout the entire check-in process. She never once looked directly into Kai's face. Her eyes stayed on his collar, on the hand resting on the counter, on his ID card, on the pen he used to sign. It was as if looking straight into a guest's eyes was something she deliberately avoided. "You'll be in room 412, she said, sliding the key across. "The elevator on the left is out of order. Please use the stairs." Kai gave a faint smile and asked casually, "The hotel is pretty quiet. Am I the only guest?" The woman took a few seconds before answering. "Tonight, yes. Nice. I get a whole floor to myself." She said nothing. Then, just before Kai could lift his luggage again, she added in a lower voice, as if she did not want anyone else to hear, though there was no one in the lobby besides them. "After midnight, no matter what you hear, do not open your door." Kai looked up at her, waiting for the half-joking smile that would reveal it as some cheap attempt to create an eerie guest experience. But the woman did not smile. "And if you see the mirror in your room," she continued, "don't look into it for too long." Kai laughed because the warning sounded both absurd and deliberate. Why not? For the first time, the woman looked straight into his eyes. That look, Kai later admitted in his email, was the first thing that made him uneasy despite himself. Because there are things that know how to look back. Kai carried his suitcase upstairs. In his letter, he said that at the time, he thought only this old hotel, strange staff, perfect for an urban mystery feature. He took a few shots of the fourth-floor hallway right away. His lens caught peeling beige walls, yellowing wall lamps, and an old wine-colored carpet with faded patterns. The hallway was unnaturally long and narrow. Doors evenly spaced on both sides. But only the far end was fully lit while the middle stretch seemed dim, as though swallowed by a thin seam of darkness. Room 412 was near the end, beside a window overlooking the backyard full of trees and moss-covered stones. The room itself was larger than he expected. A large single bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe, a TV stand, an old air conditioner, and a bathroom tiled in white that had already yellowed with age. Everything was normal, except for the mirror. It was not in the bathroom where one would expect it. It stood in the sleeping area, nearly reaching the ceiling, half as wide as a door, framed in dark black wood, positioned in the corner directly opposite the bed. Its placement meant that if you lay down and opened your eyes in the middle of the night, the first thing you might see would be its surface. Kai wrote that he stood there for nearly a minute just staring at it. Not because the mirror was beautiful or unusual, but because it felt wrong. It was too tall, Too dark, too still, as if it did not reflect the room but opened into another version of it. The glass was not bright and glossy like a modern mirror but slightly muted, as though it absorbed light. When Kai stepped to the left, the reflection shifted accordingly, perfectly normal, yet there was something in the depth behind it that made him feel like he was looking through a layer of black water. He laughed under his breath, set his camera bag on the desk, and began taking a few interior shots for reference. In the surviving series of photos, there is one detail I still cannot explain. In the earliest shots, the mirror reflects the room correctly. But by the 7th, 8th, and 9th frames, the light inside the mirror is visibly dimmer than the light outside it, as if that reflected space were not receiving the same source. In the 11th shot, the edge of the bed inside the mirror seems shifted a few centimeters from where it should be in reality. To someone glancing carelessly, it would look like a camera angle error. But if you study the sequence carefully, one after another, a feeling of unease begins to rise like a splinter under the skin. That evening, Kai went downstairs to ask about dinner. There was no restaurant. The receptionist simply handed him a prepared tray: rice, miso soup, grilled fish, pickled vegetables. Everything was still warm, though not hot, as if it had been cooked quite some time earlier. Kai ate in the room, wrote down a few notes, sent 3 hallway photos to his editor, then took a shower. Before drawing the curtains and getting into bed, he glanced at the mirror once more. It reflected him wrapped in a towel, blurred slightly by the moisture still clinging to his skin and the room around him. Normal. Completely normal. Kai even thought the warning at check-in had just been a cheap gimmick. He went to sleep around 11:20. At 12:14, he woke up. Not from a nightmare. Not because of a sound. But because of the sensation that someone was standing in the room. Kai described that feeling very precisely. He did not hear or see anything first. His body woke before his mind did, the way an animal senses a predator holding its breath nearby. His heart was already pounding while his eyes were still closed. His hands were ice cold. A line of tension crept up his spine. When he opened his eyes, the room was almost completely dark, lit only by a thin gray wash of streetlight leaking through the curtains. Everything was silent enough for him to hear his own heartbeat crashing against his ribs. Then he realized he was not alone. The feeling of being watched was coming from in front of him. From the mirror. Kai lay still for a few seconds, trying to convince himself this was only the panic of being jolted awake too suddenly. But the longer he stared, the more something seemed off. Inside the mirror, the room was still there, only darker. His reflection lay on the bed, turned toward the mirror just as he was in reality. Except, it was not perfectly aligned. Kai sat upright. In reality, he sat up immediately. In the mirror, the reflection remained lying still for one brief beat longer. Just one beat, brief enough that in daylight, fully awake, he might have been able to lie to himself and say he had imagined it. But at that hour, in that deathly quiet room, with his skin prickling and his heart thudding so hard it seemed ready to tear through his chest, that delay stood out as clearly as an electric shock. Then the figure in the mirror slowly sat up too. Kai said his entire body went rigid. Inside his head, the rational part of him was still scrambling to assemble an explanation. Visual lag from just waking up. Delayed processing. A trick of the light. He forced himself to stand, as if by doing so he could prove that everything was just a trick of his nerves. He put his feet on the floor. The reflection did the same. He took one step forward. It followed. He raised his right hand. It raised its left. Up to that point, everything was normal again, annoyingly normal. Kai exhaled, silently cursing himself for being shaken by such a stupid warning. But at that exact moment, he noticed the thing in the mirror did not lower its hand when he did. The reflected arm remained suspended in the air. At a height, at an angle, that was not natural, as if someone had forgotten to continue playing the role. Kai froze. Slowly, very slowly, the thing turned its hand and pressed its palm against the glass from the other side. 5 fingers spread wide. In the murky darkness, its skin looked paler than Kai's, almost the gray color of a corpse soaked in water. The finger joints looked a little too long. The nails were not exactly long, but dark at the edges, as if dirt or something worse had packed itself beneath them. Kai took one step back. The thing in the mirror did not. It tilted its head, as though studying him with silent curiosity. Then it smiled. Kai said nothing had ever chilled him the way that smile did. Because it was still his own face. But that smile did not belong to any human being. The lips pulled too far sideways. The cheeks lifted slowly and stiffly. Meanwhile, the eyes did not smile at all. Did not even blink, only widened a little more. The irises seeming to spread. It was not the face of a person who was pleased. It was the face of something that had just found a way out. Kai spun toward the light switch. The light snapped on. The room flashed white for an instant. In the mirror, his reflection stood beside the switch too. Hand against the wall. Normal. Completely normal. No gray palm pressed to the glass. No split-lipped grin. No blackened eyes. Kai stood there, breathing hard, cold sweat running down the back of his neck. He laughed at himself, though the sound came out crooked in his throat. "I'm overreacting," he muttered into the small voice recorder he kept for evidence. As if saying it aloud would let reason win. In that recording, his voice at first still carried a trace of mocking amusement as he described being frightened right after waking up. But by the 3rd minute, his volume dropped so low it was almost only breath. And he said, "It blinked before I did." The recording ended there. The next morning Kai came down to the lobby very early. The receptionist was wiping the counter with a white cloth. When she saw his face, her hand stopped in mid-motion. "You looked into the mirror?" It was not a question. Kai pulled out a chair and sat across from her, trying to keep his voice calm. "There was something wrong in my room last night. I want to know where that mirror came from." The woman was silent for a long time. Finally, she set the cloth aside and sat down slowly, like someone exhausted from carrying something nobody wanted to hear. "That mirror doesn't belong to the hotel," she said. "It was here before." "Before when?" "Before I started working here. Before the ownership changed. Some people say it belonged to the old house that used to stand on this land." Kai frowned. "The old house?" The woman nodded. She said that before the hotel was built, the property had been a family-run boarding house. Many decades ago, during a freezing winter, a death had taken place there. one whose police records were now almost impossible to piece together. A young woman renting a room on the top floor had been found dead under strange circumstances. There were no ligature marks on her neck. No major bruising on her skin. The room had been locked from the inside. Yet the expression on her face had been so horrific that the medical examiner reportedly said he had rarely seen anyone die as if they had witnessed something so terrible. Her eyes were wide open, the whites bloodshot from burst vessels. Her hands were scraped and bleeding as if she had clawed frantically at a hard surface. The only object in the room that showed any trace was the standing mirror placed opposite her sleeping mat. On its glass were 5 long streaks, like fingernails dragged downward from the other side. After that death, the owners of the boarding house moved away. The place stood abandoned for a while before being purchased and rebuilt into a small hotel. During demolition, workers found the mirror wrapped in oilcloth and buried under the earth near the northern wall. They had intended to throw it away, but one worker carrying it to the truck slipped and broke his neck on the spot. Another placed it temporarily in a storage room and went insane within the week, insisting there was a person standing behind him inside the mirror even when nobody was there in real life. In the end, the new owner listened to some spiritual practitioner and had the mirror moved up to a room on the 4th floor. Placed in the exact corner where it still stood, with strict instructions that its position must never be changed. "Why not destroy it?" Kai asked. The woman looked at him for a long time and then said, "Because they tried. And the people who tried were never whole again." Kai did not check out. Any normal person would have left at once. But his professional instinct and his stubbornness won out. In an email to his editor that afternoon, he wrote that he had found a story even better than an old hotel review, and that if he gathered proof, he could turn it into a major feature. He spent the rest of the day taking more photos, asking cautious questions, and searching public records in a small neighborhood library. He found an old local news clipping about the unusual death of a female lodger named Raina. The article was short and vague. No clear cause was given. But in the archived copy, one sentence had been faintly crossed out in pencil. The landlord said the young woman had repeatedly complained that the mirror in her room did not reflect her expression correctly. That evening, Kai prepared deliberately. He set a camera on the desk facing the mirror and the bed. He tied a thin string from the doorknob to the leg of a chair so he would know if the door opened. He left the bedside lamp on, kept the main light dim instead of turning it off completely, and placed a small metal crucifix on the table, something an old woman in an antique shop had pressed into his hand after hearing the hotel's name. He was not religious, but he took it anyway as a kind of psychological charm. Before getting into bed, he pulled a bath towel over the mirror to cover it. At 11:57, the camera was still recording. At 12:03, it shut off by itself. Kai only learned that later, when he reviewed the footage. At the time, he was lying in bed with his eyes wide open, staring at the broad shadow of the towel draped over the mirror. The air in the room had become thick, almost liquid cold. He told himself he did not need sleep, only patience. Stay awake, watch, collect proof, leave in the morning. But his eyelids grew heavier. Tiny gaps opened in his awareness, as if he were slipping in and out of short fragments of sleep without realizing it. Then he heard something. At first it was only a very soft rustling sound, like cloth being tugged. Kai opened his eyes wider. The towel covering the mirror was swelling outward from underneath, not billowing from any draft. The window was closed. The air conditioner was off. It bulged at the center, slowly, as if a human face were pressing against the glass from behind the fabric, pushing the towel outward into the shapes of a forehead, a nose, a chin. Then a hand appeared, 5 fingertips printed clearly through the cloth, feeling their way downward. Kai bolted upright and backed away from the bed. The towel fell to the floor. The mirror was exposed. Inside it was his room. But the lights on the other side were completely off. No, not just off. It was a darker, deeper version, as if the room there were submerged beneath black water. And standing at the foot of the bed, in that depth of darkness, was a person. It was Kai. But it was not Kai. That version of him was slightly thinner. Its head tilted a little. Its shoulders slumped as if its bones no longer fit correctly in their sockets. The t-shirt it wore was identical to the one Kai had on, but darker across the chest, as if long soaked. Its face was deathly pale, lips bruised dark, eyes wide with black hollows beneath them. It stood motionless, staring at him with a smile too slight to be called a smile. Kai wrote that his first feeling was not fear but absolute revulsion. That thing resembled him so closely it felt like an insult to the idea of himself. It was not a stranger in disguise. It was a version assembled from details so exact, so precise, that the wrongness in every feature only stood out more violently. Kai snatched up the desk lamp and hurled it straight at the mirror. The lamp slammed into the glass with a violent crash. But the mirror did not break. In the video captured before the camera died, there are only 2 final seconds of violent flicker before the screen goes black. When the image is brightened digitally, it appears for a split instant as if a shape had stepped out of the mirror at the exact moment the lamp struck. After that impact, the room fell into total silence. Silence so complete Kai could hear himself swallowing. Then from the hallway outside came 3 knocks at the door. Knock. 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 Not fast. Not loud. Polite. Like a night attendant asking if the guest needed anything. Kai stood frozen. He remembered the warning not to open the door after midnight. The knocking came again, closer this time, as though whoever stood outside had bent near the door. "Sir." A woman's voice. The receptionist's voice. "Please open the door." Kai did not move. A long silence followed. Then the voice came again, but slightly distorted now. Thicker, as though several layers of sound were overlapping. "It's all right. It's already in the room with you." Kai wrote that he almost vomited when he heard that. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the door. And at that exact moment, behind him, from inside the mirror, came a 4th knock. Tap. Not on the room door. From the glass itself. Kai whirled around. The thing in the mirror had now come right up against the reflective surface. Its face was almost touching the glass. Its skin was gray. Its mouth was opening wider and wider. So wide the hinges of its jaw looked ready to tear. And from that black cavity of a throat came Kai's own voice. Low, trembling, urgent. "Don't turn around." Kai jerked back toward the door on instinct. That was the mistake. In the brief moment when he was not looking at the mirror, something behind him had changed position. He felt it before he saw it. A vertical line of cold rising just behind his neck. A damp, sour odor like clothes that had never dried, mixed with the smell of rusting metal. The skin at the back of his neck tightened as if breath were being exhaled directly onto it. Kai slowly turned his head. In the mirror, his reflection was still standing in the middle of the room, back turned toward the glass. But in real life, a hand had come to rest on his shoulder. A long, bony hand, cold as flesh just pulled from water. Kai screamed and grabbed a chair, swinging wildly behind him. No one was there. The room was empty. The hand was gone, but on the shoulder of his shirt, 5 damp gray marks remained. He did not sleep again that night. He sat huddled in a chair with his back pressed into the corner of the wall, eyes fixed on the mirror until dawn. When the first daylight slipped through the curtains, he noticed something else. Inside the mirror, the chair he sat on was always slightly out of place. Only slightly, but enough to understand that all night long, the reflection had never been perfectly aligned with reality. The next morning, Kai demanded to speak to the manager. There was no manager. The receptionist said only that the owner lived far away and rarely appeared. When Kai confronted her about the voice outside his door the previous night, her face visibly blanched. A long time later, she admitted this was not the first time a guest had heard a voice in the hallway. Some said they heard the voice of a dead relative. Some heard their own voice. Some heard a child crying. Some heard a staff member asking them to open the door because of an emergency. The only common factor was this: if they had looked into the mirror that night, the voice would come. "Has anyone ever opened the door?" Kai asked. The woman did not answer directly. She only said, "Those who open it usually do not stay long enough to tell anyone." At that point, the story should have ended with Kai packing up and fleeing. But perhaps those who become obsessed with finding the truth always underestimate the endurance of what is hunting them. Kai still kept digging for the origin. That afternoon he wandered the neighborhood and eventually found an elderly woman selling incense near an old cemetery at the end of the road. When she heard the name Tsukikage, she fell silent, then pulled an oil paper bundle of yellowed charms from beneath the counter. She said that the girl named Reina had not died on the first night. For weeks beforehand, she had lived in that room in a state of escalating collapse. Neighbors heard her talking to herself, heard sobbing, heard pleading. One night she ran barefoot into the courtyard in freezing weather wearing only a night dress, crying and saying, "It doesn't copy me anymore. It wants me to look." At first, everyone assumed she was suffering some kind of nervous breakdown. But then a woman staying across the hall swore that she had once seen, through the half-open door, Reina standing motionless before the mirror while the figure in the mirror had its head turned in another direction, as if listening to someone behind her shoulder. The incense seller added one detail that sent a chill through Kai's spine. According to what had been passed down, the thing in the mirror could not step out immediately. It had to be recognized. It needed the person on this side to look long enough, to fear deeply enough, and to begin doubting their own self. Each encounter thinned the boundary a little more. It learned the voice, the posture, the rhythm of blinking, The habit of touching the throat or smoothing the hair. It did not merely want to frighten. It wanted to replace. And once the person outside had been weakened by sleeplessness, by terror, by constantly staring into the glass to check whether they were still themselves, the thing on the other side would find an opening. How do you stop it? Kai asked. The old woman looked at him the way one looks at someone who has already stepped halfway into a grave. Stop looking. There's no other way? There is. But whoever uses it must accept that there may be no way back to the way things were before. Kai never explained clearly what she told him after that. In the file, there was only a scrap of paper found tucked into his notebook. Written in black ink, containing a few short lines: salt, hair, blood, true name. Do not let your whole shadow stand inside the glass. Do not let it call your name correctly the third time. The third night was the last night Kai was ever seen. He sent me an email at 9:41 p.m. with the subject line, "If I stop replying, do not come here yourself." The message was fragmented, as if written by a shaking hand. He said he thought he understood how it worked. That the mirror was not a fixed gateway but a surface that remembers. The more people looked into it with fear, the thicker it became from the layers of abandoned reflections left behind. He believed there was not just one thing inside. That might have been why the voice outside the door was not always the same. He added one sentence I still remember word for word. "I'm beginning not to be sure which memories are mine anymore. There are things only the mirror knows." That night, from what could be pieced together from the camera, the recorder, and later testimony, Kai performed some kind of ritual. He scattered salt in an arc before the mirror, affixed charms to the four corners of the black frame, cut a small lock of his hair, and used a razor blade to slice his fingers so he could smear a few drops of blood across the glass while repeating his own name over and over, as if to assert possession of himself. In the recording, his voice is hoarse but each word is clear. "I am Tran Min Kai. This is my body. This is my face. This is my voice. You do not get to take it." At first, nothing happened. Then the surface of the mirror began to cloud from within. Not with condensation, but as if a thin gray skin were crawling up behind the glass, slowly covering the depth of the reflection. Black spots appeared, like eyes, sometimes near, sometimes far. The charms trembled slightly though there was no wind. A crackling hum spread through the audio recorder like failing radio static. Then, very slowly, a hand began to emerge from the mirror. Not another illusion trapped on the far side this time. Now it pushed directly against the reflective surface, bulging it outward as if it were a membrane of water being pierced from within. Kai did not run. Perhaps he knew that if he turned his back, he would lose. He raised the razor blade. But the first thing that came through was not the hand. It was his face. Exact enough to be revolting. It pushed out of the mirror like a corpse floating up through swamp water. Hair plastered wet against its skull. Eyes wide open, mouth smiling. The rest of the body followed. Soft and slack at first, then gradually stiffening into the complete shape of a human being. Once it stood fully upright on this side of the mirror. It wore the exact same clothes as Kai. Bore the same small scar on the chin. The same slope of shoulders. The same rhythm of breathing. The only difference was in the eyes. Its eyes had none of the depth of life. They were too black. like two holes. The recording becomes heavily distorted at this point, but two identical voices can still be heard layered over one another. One voice says, "Who are you?" The other answers, "Did you forget already?" Then both speak at the same time, "I am Kai." The sounds of struggle followed. Furniture toppling, ragged breathing, muffled growls caught in the throat. The camera captured nothing because it had already died. But on the floor afterward, investigators found long drag marks, blood sprayed in fine streaks, and a broken human tooth lying near the bed leg. The strange part was that the blood samples all came back with the same blood type. The same genetic markers, as if there had not been two different people in that room that night, but two versions of the same person trying to tear each other out of existence. The receptionist later said that sometime after 1 in the morning, she heard heavy pounding from the floor above. She did not dare go up. Closer to 2 o'clock, everything fell silent, but then another sound began in its place. Laughter. Not loud, not prolonged, just small bursts of suppressed giggling that seemed to drift through the air ducts. The stairwell corners, the far end of the corridor. As if someone were walking around the 4th floor, finding something deeply amusing. The next morning, Kai did not come down to check out. The receptionist waited until nearly 9 before going up to the 4th floor with an older housekeeper. Room 412 was unlocked. Inside, it was a wreck. The chair was broken, the lamp shattered, the bed sheets pulled onto the floor. Salt scattered everywhere, and long streaks marked the walls as though something had been dragged while clawing for purchase. But there was no body. No person. The bathroom was empty. Under the bed was empty. The window was locked from the inside. Only the mirror was clean. Clean to an absurd degree. Every trace of dust, blood, and fingerprints had vanished from its surface as if nothing had ever touched it. Inside it, the room reflected normally, and standing in the far corner, near the edge of the frame, was a faint human shape, as if slowly backing away into the darkness behind it. The housekeeper screamed and fainted on the spot. She quit that same day and then suffered nightmares for months. In one of the rare moments when she agreed to talk, she said that just before losing consciousness, she had seen the shadow in the mirror tilt its head toward her and lift one finger to its lips in a gesture of silence. Kai's disappearance was reported to the police. But the result, of course, led nowhere. No hallway cameras were functioning. There was no sign of him leaving the hotel. No witnesses except people who spoke in evasive half-truths nobody believed. The hotel owner denied anything unusual had occurred and suggested the guest might simply have left during the night. Newspapers ran only a brief item about a photojournalist disappearing on assignment. The file went cold. That should have been the end. But it was not. About 3 weeks later, I received another email from Kai's address. There was no greeting, no subject line. Only one attached photograph. It had been taken from inside a dark hotel room. In the center was a tall black framed mirror. The mirror reflected the room and the person holding the camera. It was Kai. His face was pale, thinner than before, eyes shadowed, lips cracked, but unmistakably him. The only thing wrong was the hand holding the camera. It had 6 fingers. I enlarged that photograph dozens of times. It was not motion blur. Not a double exposure. 6 fingers were clearly visible. so clearly that every time I looked too long, I had to look away. 2 days later, a second email arrived. This time it contained a short message. Do not reply if you see me blink in the photo. Do not open any file where the mirror fills the frame. It is learning how to pass through things other than glass. I did not reply. But I was wrong to keep reading. Over the next few nights, even in my apartment hundreds of kilometers away, I began to feel things I could not explain. The bathroom mirror made me uncomfortable. The dark screen of my phone reflected my face as though it belonged to someone standing in a basement. Once, while washing my hands, I looked up and would have sworn that my reflection lagged behind me by a single beat. I immediately covered every reflective surface in my home with towels. It sounds insane, but doing it let me breathe. The final email came at 3:12 a.m. I did not open it immediately. I waited until the next afternoon, under daylight, in a crowded cafe, before I dared click. The message contained only one line. Do not let it call your name correctly. Nothing else. That address never sent another message. I tried to trace Kai's records, contacted the local police station, called the hotel again and again, but the number had been disconnected. Some people said Sukikage had shut down. Others said it was still operating, though nobody could give a precise address. On a few obscure travel forums, short posts would occasionally appear and then vanish very quickly. Their contents were disturbingly similar: an old hotel, very few guests, staff who avoided looking people in the eye, and a warning not to look into the mirror before midnight. There was another story I collected from a couple who had accidentally wandered there. They stayed less than 2 hours before fleeing because the woman said that in the lobby mirror, someone had been standing beside her even though her husband was outside smoking. When they came back to return the key, the receptionist asked only one question: did you see it standing closer to you or farther away? They did not understand and drove away that same night. A week later, the husband began hearing his wife call to him from the bathroom while she was not home. I found one more account, shorter this time, from an elderly taxi driver. He said that years ago he had picked up a man from that hotel and driven him to the train station near dawn. The passenger sat in the back seat the entire ride without speaking, clutching a travel bag tightly and never looking into the rearview mirror. When the man got out, the driver happened to glance at the mirror in the center of the windshield and saw the man still sitting in the back seat. While outside the car, another identical man was paying the fare. He panicked and drove away immediately. After that, he removed every reflective ornament from his taxi. You may be thinking that none of these fragments prove anything except the spread of an urban legend. Maybe that is true. I tried to think that way for a long time. But then something happened that made me stop arguing with myself. Last winter, I was on a work trip staying in a small hotel not far from home. It was an entirely normal place. Clean, bright, unrelated to this story. I entered my room a little after 10, showered, and was about to open my laptop to work. While plugging in my phone charger, I caught my face reflected in the black screen. Normal. But the moment I set the phone down on the table, a very soft voice came from that dark reflective surface. Clear. Familiar. Kai's voice. It knows you read the emails. I dropped the phone. The screen lit up. There was nothing there. From that night on, I have never again placed a mirror opposite where I sleep. I do not stare too long into dark reflective surfaces after midnight. I no longer reread the emails late at night. The file on Kai, the photographs, the recordings, the old newspaper clipping. I sealed all of it in an envelope, placed it in the bottom drawer, and taped one sentence to the front. Do not open alone at night. I thought that if I never spoke of it, the story would die quietly. But it seems some stories do not die when they are forgotten. They simply wait to be seen again. If you have ever traveled, ever stayed in a strange hotel, ever walked into a room where a standing mirror faced the bed, remember this. Do not trust the private conviction that you are alert enough, strong enough, rational enough to tell reality from illusion. That is the first opening. The things that live in reflections do not need you to believe in them. They only need you to look. Just one look longer than necessary. Just one moment when you wake in the darkness. Open your eyes, and see that something in the mirror does not quite move with you. When that happens, do not try to check again. Do not walk closer. Do not raise your hand to see whether it copies you. Do not reassure yourself that it is only sleep deprivation. And above all, if someone in the hallway knocks after midnight, in the voice of a loved one, in the voice of hotel staff, in your own voice, then no matter what they say, do not open the door. Because by then, the most dangerous thing may not be standing outside it. It is already in the room. It is standing very close behind you. And in the mirror before you. It is practicing how to smile with your face.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.